Can I start by thanking the Scottish Government for securing time for today's debate? It is a crucial issue, and I think the recent coverage on things like Channel 4 News and our own understanding of the issue makes this absolutely prescient, so I'm grateful to that. I also welcome the efforts by the Minister to foster consensus around today's motion. It was very important to me that she reached out to each of us to talk to us about the wording of the amendment. I'm grateful to her for that. I also recognise the journey that her party has been on in the progressive attitude to addiction that the phrasing of this motion hints at, and I thank her for that as well. But before I give the fulsome support of these benches to this motion, I must, I fear, depart from that spirit of consensus briefly. More than twice as many people are dying from drug use in this country as when her government came to power. This country's rate of drug-related deaths is 2.5 times that of the UK as a whole. And despite that, despite the Minister's response to my intervention, ADP funding is not at record levels. In fact, her government's response to this was to cut those funding levels by 23% in 2015. That's £1.3 million in our capital city each year alone. I and colleagues like Neil Finlay and Anna Sarwar and Miles Briggs raised this repeatedly over the past 2 years, but the government did not rectify it fast enough, and people are dead as a result of it. A total of 867 people in Scotland died after using illegal or prescription drugs in 2016, 23% more than the year previous, and 106% more than 10 years ago. Figures also show that heroin and opioids, I will do in a second, were implicated in 88% of those deaths, which is why we will support the government's motion today. Minister.
Minister.
Again, thank the member for giving way. I guess I just want to kind of pinpoint the fact, and to draw on what actually Anna Sarwar says and what evidence tells us, that actually drug deaths have been increasing since the mid-1990s, and that this is why we are in the situation we are in, because it has been rising. It's been an increasing trend. So it's not necessarily correct to merely correlate funding scenarios with drug-related deaths. And I think that does a disservice to the point which we're trying to get to today, which is to try and find an effective solution to some of the issues that we're grappling with in Scotland.
Alec Cole-Hamilton.
Well, I'm grateful to the Minister for that intervention, but if your response to an upward shift in drug-related deaths is to cut ADP funding, then there is something fundamentally wrong with your government's approach to drugs policy. So while I remind this government of their failure in that regard, I do welcome this motion, and I hope for more like it to come, because there are many benefits to safe injecting spaces. 100 facilities globally with over 30 years of experience have amassed a weight of empirical evidence behind their efficacy. They reduce risky behaviour in terms of needle sharing, and I declare an interest as co-convener on the cross-party group of sexual health and blood-borne viruses, and it is in part that this is why we have seen this rise of HIV infection in the city of Glasgow. There is a direct correlation with the drug deaths in that city. I share the government's consternation that the Lord Advocate will not give immunity from prosecution for people using the centre. And I have some sympathy with the idea of devolving drugs policy. It's consistent with other models of federalism that my party aspire to. But my focus right now, and that on my party, is on changing the landscape of our policy response to drug use across the whole of these islands. And my amendment delineates the rest of the iceberg, of which safe injection services are just the tip. Now, the government motion rightly describes this as a public health issue, and that's absolutely right. And I want to, if I may, use the example of cannabis, because I think there are public health benefits to cannabis which we are not quite yet exploring. I have raised before with the Cabinet Secretary herself the example of Murray Gray, who is a 5-year-old constituent of mine in West Edinburgh. Murray suffers from a very severe form of epilepsy, which sees him suffer many violent episodes and attacks and fits every single day. The only thing that can offer him any kind of relief is a cannabis derivative called cannabidiol. Now, Murray's mother, Karen, is about to take Murray to The Hague against the advice of his doctors because he is unwell enough to travel so that he can have that medication prescribed there. Now, I accept this is not down to the Cabinet Secretary. This is a UK problem in cannabis therapy prescriptions, but it is a problem nonetheless. So cannabis can provide many untold health benefits to a range of conditions, but right now it is only causing incalculable harm. Harm in the cannabis farms tended by children trafficked to this country and held in slave conditions. Harm in the weapons-grade skunk available on the black market, which is linked to severe psychological difficulty, and for which we could be generating revenue streams which we can funnel back into treatment, and harm in wasted police time and capacity in our prisons. Remember, Deputy Presiding Officer, that 60% of drug arrests last year were for the possession of cannabis. The war on drugs was lost a long time ago, yet members in this chamber are still fighting it. We need to get those...
The member is just about going to his last minute, so be brief, please.
Presiding Officer, I wonder if the member can explain whether he advocates the decriminalisation of cannabis for health use only or for all cannabis decriminalisation.
Alec Cole-Hamilton.
Happy to do so. Not only do we see it decriminalised for the health use, but absolutely we've called for a national UK-wide regulated cannabis market for recreational use. We also need to take the profit derived from that recreational cannabis market out of the hands of dealers and human traffickers and into the Treasury to free up also, which will be bolstered by freed up criminal justice capacity as well. We need to ensure those that can derive medical support and help from cannabis-derived therapies are supported to do so. Our drug policies have failed. And my ending was very similar to Anas Sarwar's, in that the definition of insanity is to do things again and again and expect the same results. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I now call on Alice.